Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Stephen Cummins. I'm the Director of Performing Arts here at the College of DuPage, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all. Often in these occasions we'd say, welcome to this distinguished group or this group, and rather than subdivide us, I'd rather say welcome, as many indigenous people say, to you all human beings, to this very important moment here on the college campus, a moment of reflection and also a moment of celebration. So without any further ado, I would like to proceed with today's events and introduce to you Trustee Nancy Svoboda.
Thank you. I had a pleasure just a few weeks ago of meeting Carol Martin at an event that we were both participating with. And very quickly I found out that Carol had been at the Kent State campus. So I approached her and talked to her, introducing that as a subject for us to share, and she started mentioning some of her experiences. Little did I realize that she was on this Kent State campus the day of the shooting, and she had insights and memories that brought tears to her eyes and mine as well. So I'm so pleased that she was willing to take time out of her schedule to be here to make all of this more real for each and every one of us. So I turn the program over to Carol Martin.
I want to thank everyone for inviting me to this dedication. I think it's lovely. I think have any of you been to Kent? Any of you been to the campus? Okay. You'll know, if you know some of the history of Kent, the shooting on the campus divided, as we were a nation divided before the shootings, we were a nation divided after the shootings. And the people of Ohio very well were divided. And I will tell you that on the day of the shootings, as my mother was coming to collect me at a relative's house, my uncle made the comment, and to show you how divided it was, this is my uncle, I was just on the campus, they were shooting students, said they should have shot them all. That was the prevailing feeling. I will tell you that for years and years and years, Kent State had this schizophrenic feeling about May 4th, like, oh, well, it happened, but let's try to forget about it. And they've tried in all kinds of ways, and it was only in the 1990s that people finally came to grips with what happened and actually put up some memorials. So this does mean a lot to me, and I've talked to some of my friends that were there with me that day, and so it does, I'm glad to be here. I wanted to just talk just briefly, because you can't talk about Kent State without talking about the times that we were living in back then. Kent State did not happen in a vacuum. It wasn't that suddenly there were all these demonstrations on the Kent campus. You have to understand, if you've been to Kent and if you know about Kent, and as I've said, Kent was a predominantly white, middle class, working class school. In Ohio at the time, if you graduated from a state school, a state high school, you could get into a state university. This was the height of the baby boomers. We had students from other states, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, who were coming to Kent, paying the out-of-state tuition because there were no rooms in their school. They couldn't get into a Rutgers or Penn State because there were so many of us coming out at the time. So we were not what you would call a hotbed of radicalism. You did not see, we were not Berkeley. We were not Columbia. We were not Madison. We were basically a hardworking, middle-class, first-generation immigrants coming up the ladder. And that's how it was when I went to school in 1968, when I actually entered Kent. Yes, did we have some demonstrations against the war? Yes. Did the anti-war movement come to Kent? Yes. Did we have some radicals? Yes. But basically, we were very much middle class. So why did Kent happen, and why did it happen that weekend and that day? So I'll give you my feelings on that, personal recollections of that. And let me throw something out to you. Anyone here remember who said nabbering nabobs of negativism? Anyone here remember that? Spiro Agnew, vice president at the time. Nattering nabobs of negativism were student protesters. And if you look up nabob, I think that's how it's pronounced, that's how he pronounced it, which I did, because I've forgotten. It means self-important person. So basically, they think they're so good. And that was a divisive statement around the country. Does anyone here know who said worse than brown shirts, referring to the Kent State students on the Sunday before the shootings? No. Jim Rhodes, governor of Ohio. There were these political, what's the right word? People were trying to gain political advantage. Jim Rhodes was in a hotly contested Republican primary that was going to be held on May 5th for a Senate seat. He was running against a Taft. I don't remember which Taft. There's so many Tafts in Ohio who have run for office. It's hard to keep track of all the Tafts. And he wanted to show how tough he was on student demonstrators. On April 30th, 1970, I can remember watching on a little black and white TV in my dorm room, Richard Nixon announcing the incursion into Cambodia. And instinctively, I knew, oops, this is not going to be good. May 1st, 1970, was it May 1st? May 1st was Friday, no, May 2nd. May 2nd, 1970, maybe it was May 1st. But anyway, it was either day. We had what they call the students, if you ever looked at, I went on the Kent map, and I know you probably can't see this, but there is a bell. It's we have what we call the Commons, which is a hill. And at the bottom of the hill is this bell. This bell's been there forever. I think it came with the university in 1910. They were ringing the bell and burying the Constitution at this point in time. On another part of the Commons, the Black United students were having a demonstration of some sort. I don't remember what that was. And because I was in the Greek system at the time, we were celebrating Sigma Chi Derby Day. So you can see how schizophrenic campus at that time. That night, my roommate was at a party across the street from what the ROTC buildings, ROTC. And our ROTC buildings, the best I can describe them as, if you ever see movies from World War II, where they have the barracks and the old buildings, and they were built for World War II, and they were temporary, and they were supposed to be torn down. Those were our ROTC buildings in 1970. They had two buildings that looked like that, barracks, in one part. I don't know to this day who started the fire, how the fire started, but they were burned down. My roommate watched it from the house that was across the street, the party house, and saw what was going on. The next day, the National Guard came on campus, Sunday. And it was a beautiful day like today, that Sunday. It was similar to 20 degrees cooler, though, because it was early May and it wasn't this warm. It's a very beautiful day. They had declared martial law. And on Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and somewhere in my archives, I have pictures of it, we walked the campus, my roommates and I, to see the guardsmen. They had their armored troop carriers circling in front of the administration building. There was, we have an administration building that's on the hill. Kent has a lot of hills, and they were there. They also had an armored troop carrier at the front of campus. So that when there is a picture of me, you know, kind of having my hand and real casual look at this armored troop carrier. So you can see, you know, if you look at those pictures, we had absolutely no fear. We had no inkling. And I can tell you right now that every student on campus would say, there's no bullets in those guns. We did not believe they would ever keep bullets in those guns. That night, yes, we had a little march. You know how marches go. If you were on a college campus back then, a group would go by and you'd kind of get in and just kind of wander. And yes, they had tear gas at the front of campus, and so all of us went back to our dorms. Life was going to go on. The next day, May 4th, at breakfast, I can remember talking to my friends, and as I was saying, I was good student. I had a class, 11:50 it started, speech class, and our professor was kind of, perhaps we'd call him difficult today, because he said if you missed the midterm, you'd fail the course. So I think I can't miss the midterm. So I did tell my friends, I will meet you up on the hill later, because we knew it had already, this was before Facebook and tweets and everything, but there was the social media, I guess, was called landline phones. And everyone knew that there was going to be a demonstration at noon on Taylor Hill. What happened next, as I recall, it was about 12:20, I think, 12:25. Of course, we didn't have the midterm because the professor thought what was going on campus was something more important to talk about, and he wanted what was happening. And I can recall to this day, I can hear those shots in my mind. And it was like firecrackers. That's what we thought it was. Boom, 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 boom. And we're in the building, and everyone ran to the windows. And we looked, and all you could see was smoke coming, the guns, I guess big rifles like that. I am not a member of the NRA. I don't know anything about guns. I do know that you could see smoke rising. We were confused. What was it? We didn't know. A student bus driver. We had a big campus, we had a bus system. Students drove those buses, came running into the classroom saying, they're shooting, people have been shot. Well, we're in, like, what? We couldn't comprehend it. I'm telling you, I'm 19, I can't comprehend this. Then the sirens came. Sirens as if I've never heard them before. Sirens from every point that you could hear sirens coming. Like every ambulance or every police car, if they all converged here in front of this building, how it would sound, just from everywhere. By this time, we are, using the vernacular back then, freaked about what is going on. I go out of the music and speech building where I was to go to, didn't know what to do, to my next class, which was in what we call Bowman Hall, if you ever look on the map. And to get to Bowman Hall from music and speech, you have to walk in front of Taylor Hall. The shootings happened in back of Taylor Hall. With the pictures you see of the student the blood running down, that was in back of Taylor Hall, as I was saying, looking out toward a parking lot. I'm on the other side of Taylor Hall. In front of me are the guardsmen in a semicircle with their rifles pointed up, just like that. And I walked right in front of them and got to Bowman, and when I got there, we finally realized what had happened. We had to go back to our dorms. We got back to the dorm. They locked the dorms. And then the strangest thing happened. I still don't know to this day how it happened, but you know, every phone on campus went dead. There were no phones. And remember, we had no computers. We had typewriters. We had no cell phones, of course, the landline. Every phone went dead, and they kept us locked in our dorms. And that happened, we were locked in the dorm for about two hours or so. And then the speakers, what do you call those things they used to have with politicians? Huh? You know? Bullhorn. Bullhorns on cars. Going through the campus saying, evacuate, evacuate, leave Kent by the nearest route. Kent is closed. Just constantly, evacuate, evacuate, leave by the nearest route. Well, this was interesting because what they had done was they had closed all the roads into Kent off, so you couldn't get into Kent. This was at a time when we didn't have cars. It's like, evacuate, and how? You know, this is a nice question, and they're telling us we got to get out of campus, get out of Dodge right now. Luckily, we were in suites with 4 people on one side of the suite and 4 on the other. And the suite mates on the other side, one of the girls, she had been on the phone with her mother, who lived in Warren, Ohio. And when the phone went dead, and her mother got really worried, what is going on up there? So her and her dad got in their car, and drove to Kent through the back roads and managed to get around all the blockades, because every main road into Kent was blocked. You couldn't get in, you couldn't get out. So we piled in the car, we go to Warren. She drops me off at my relative's house, and my mother comes pick me up and takes me back to Cleveland. Of course, you're in shock. I'm going to tell you how shocked you are. My roommate came in, I still remember this, and she heard the shots. She ran, and when she ran, she almost stepped into blood. She didn't, from Jeffrey Miller, if you remember the picture of the blood coming down the hill. So we didn't go back to Kent for 6 weeks. The campus had closed. There was all the logistics then of how are we going to get credit for that semester. The next day, May 5th, I do believe, I was with some friends, and we went to Case Western Reserve University, which is in Cleveland, and they were having a demonstration in support of Kent. And I do believe that most colleges and universities at the time, the day after, did strike. The campuses were closed. It's so hard today to think of the fact that people divided us so much that their children, which is what we were, 19 young adults, were the enemy. And I think of that when I hear some of the rhetoric that I hear today, and I was telling Nancy, because it bothers me. Because maybe we haven't learned what we should have learned from what happened back then. And maybe we shouldn't think of ourselves as enemies, but maybe we should really think of ourselves as being Americans, United States citizens, which is what we are. We may differ, but we're all Americans. We are not the enemy. And I can tell you back then, we were the enemy to a significant part of the population. That's what happened. Kent happened at Kent because things just, what do you want to say, a conversion, a perfect storm, whatever. The guardsmen were coming off of being on duty trying to stop the Teamsters from violence during a strike. This was because the guardsmen were actually in Akron guarding bridges, because this was at the time when you had a strike, it wasn't just picketing, it was like shooting. They shot each other too, and they were trying to protect the bridges so that the Teamster, the strike, they came. They were the same age as us. So it's kind of like, I think it's a cautionary tale that should be remembered for not letting the country divide itself again. Because that's what happens. We shot students. We, the collective we. And it wasn't right, and we're not a third world country. And if you do go to Kent, I urge you, one thing I urge you to do is to actually go on campus and retrace the route, because a lot has been written about what happened. A lot of it, yes, as someone who was there, I do not agree with. I don't, because if you look at what happened and where the students were shot, where they were hit, there was a great deal of distance. There was at least, I think, 120 feet from the rifles, the guardsmen, when they turned. They came up the hill and then they turned and they shot, to the actual first student. So I hope I've given you some insights. It hasn't left me. It will never leave me. Thank you for inviting me to share this, and thank you for doing this lovely sculpture. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to introduce to you Professor of Art Chuck Boone.
I keep forgetting how old I am. That's better. Greetings. Falls on me to offer a bit of background for this dedication. And first I want to thank Carol Martin for the comments. That I don't think there's any substitute for firsthand experience, and for reminding us really why we're here. What we have here today is a work that'll serve the college for many years as a memorial. But it has also served the formal education program of the college in allowing students to observe the entire creative process of a commissioned artwork. And if you came in early, you saw a number of students talking with the artists today. They got to observe the problem and the challenge to create a memorial that retains some sense of those first trees and to develop a more formal memorial of the Kent State shootings. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. They also got to see the commissioning, the selection of an artist to create the work, the drawings that were intermediate to the creation of this object, the proposal. They got to see the process of approval. They got to visit the artist's studio while the work was in process, and experience firsthand what it is like to take on this kind of a challenge. And they got to ultimately come here today and see a temporary installation, and there's some things we have to work out about a permanent installation yet due to the construction on campus. But for the moment, they've seen the process to as close to conclusion as you can and got to witness firsthand the realities of being an artist. And so that entire process was part of that classroom experience, and in some ways will continue to be part of that in perpetuity. The challenge in creating a memorial artwork is to create a work that draws us beyond its direct significance and towards something else, toward another greater understanding. Let me give you a simple example that sets aside personal taste. Can't help it, I need to use a visual device. I'm an art teacher, so there's got to be a prop of some kind. Now, a gardener tends a garden. In so doing, that gardener tills soil, fertilizes, waters, and prunes. If the gardener plucks a white rose from a bush, we don't think anything of it. It's normal. However, if a white rose is carefully placed in a vase, we look at it differently. It takes on a different purpose and identity. If someone walks up to a vase white rose and crushes it in his hand, we think of that person as uncivilized. They missed something. We think so because of the context of the vase. The rose is cherished as something more than a rose, if only because it's a specifically chosen example of beauty. And what kind of a person would deliberately attack the beauty? And so we recoil at the thought. Now, if that vased white rose is presented to another person or persons, it takes on a figurative significance beyond the literalness of its beauty or the fact that it is simply a flower. In the case of a white rose, that significance might be purity or humility or peace, even the peace of death. Google offers a host of alternative understandings, but the significance shifts with the circumstances, the vase. The presentation of the white rose becomes an act of expression. Whether left on the vine or presented in a vase, the white rose dies. All roses die. But if it's received well, if it fits and fills a cultural need or generates contemplation beyond our memory, the white rose becomes a symbol and takes on an identity and embeds itself in the rituals of its culture. The expression is remembered and usually replicated. And so we remember the white rose as it changes history. And that's the function of a memorial. In a memorial, it's inadequate for the work to be merely beautiful or for it to conjure up a litany of possible references. It needs to reference the collective memory of the thing memorialized. It must cause its culture to recall the thing referenced, in this case, the Kent State shootings, and to consider some significant aspect of that recall, usually something with an ethical or moral subtext. And so it is here. There's no term limit on the value of remembering. 40 years ago, our students and faculty sought to memorialize the tragic shooting. 2 years ago, we sought to replace 40-year-old trees with healthy trees and a memorial artwork that incorporated those first trees as relics. We sought out an artist to take on this complex commission, someone who could take us beyond a mere statue and follow the lead of memorials that were developed in the late 20th century, and I'm thinking in particular of Maya Lin's work. Something that would be able to bring forth a work that spoke through the materials and form rather than through purely mimetic imagery. That's what led us to Richard Rezac. Richard's a very accomplished artist based in Chicago. He's won numerous awards, including 2 NEA fellowships, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and a recent residency at Yale. He's exhibited his work internationally and currently is a professor of sculpture at the Art Institute in Chicago. His work exhibits architectural references as well as some sensitivity of Zen aesthetics in his material selection. His sense of design is very clearly reflective of American minimalism. These things are documented throughout his bibliography, and they certainly converge in the Kent State Memorial. But what intrigues me most about Richard's work and what got me excited about having him do this job is that he has the ability to generate what I will call a precise gesture. As you look at Richard's work, there is an arrangement of shape and form that is very intuitive and gestural, but his intuition is applied with the accuracy of a T-square in a machine shop. That seeming contradiction is a critical element in creating a memorial as opposed to any other work of art. And that's really why we selected Richard for this project. And so, at that point, I've explained to you how we got here, and I'll turn this over to Richard. So, Richard? Yeah. Is that a distraction or you want?
Thank you, Chuck, for your very thoughtful comments and also your very kind introduction. I would also like to express my appreciation to Barb Wiesen and Stephen Cummins, along with all of the members of the college's art committee, for selecting me to create this memorial sculpture and for their support and guidance along the way. So as you now know, this sculpture commemorates the tragic events of May 1970, the killings of 4 students at Kent State University by the Ohio National Guard, and the killings of 2 students at Jackson State University by the Mississippi State Police. This memorial is, of course, built on, or rather with, wood from the maple trees planted a few days after May 4th, 1970, by College of DuPage students, faculty, and staff. Most impressive to me in this original gesture, the planting of these trees, and I can say the primary reason that I accepted this commission was the heartfelt outreach that this represented. We know of the 4 students from Kent State. Less known are the 2 students from Jackson State, an event incorporated on the original plaque set into the ground near the trees. Consequently, all 6 students are honored with this commemorative sculpture because all were Americans who care deeply about this country and its Constitution. In May 1970, I was graduating from high school in Lincoln, Nebraska, and one of my brothers, 11 months older than I, was then serving in the Army in Vietnam. That spring, I submitted my military draft form, as required by all American males at age 18, and claimed conscientious objector status. That period in American history was divisive and traumatic and changed many people, including my brother and me. Since the 1970s, late 1970s until now, I have been an artist primarily making abstract sculpture. This commission represents one of the few times that I have incorporated found objects in a sculpture, or more specifically, material with a previously realized purpose. The tree parts and the language on the bronze plaques. This is also, I would say, one of the most objectively representational sculptures that I have made. This determination was both obvious and appropriate from the beginning, because foremost, commemorative public art needs to communicate its subject and context to as many as possible. Its visual language should ideally speak to all. The first decision I made in this composition was to highlight the growth rings of each of the 4 trees at mid-size, polished with attention. These became the portraits or profiles of the Kent State students: Allison Krauss, Jeffrey Miller, Sandra Lee Schrewer, and William Schroeder. Metaphorically, they distinguish time and convey difference amongst the same. I then felt that the addition of the lowest and the highest portions of each tree could best represent its entirety. The trunk sections that met the ground now levitate, and the branch tips at the furthest reach are now presented as a bouquet, cast permanently into bronze. More challenging to me was the composing, the symbolizing of James Green and Philip Gibbs, the African-American students at Jackson State. You can see that the pair is comprised of the same form, inverted, both vessel-like in appearance. These bronzes are fluted, as in classical columns, based, of course, on fallen logs. and at this size signify for me flower, plant, flame, lantern, and seed, all suggestive of growth or light. The circling lines on their rustic bronze base refers back to the tree rings, but also suggests the ripple outward that a stone causes when dropped into a pond. Just as the civil rights movement in this country has been naturally spreading slowly and firmly. And finally, of the two plaques, one replicates the original statement established by those from this college in 1970, only slightly expanded, and the other a poem by Marvin Bell, beautifully expresses the meaning of Kent State: conflict, racism, grief, and regret. My hope is that this commission work will inform and allow heartfelt reflection to those who encounter it. Thank you. I should just add that following the formal program, I'd be happy to take questions.
I'd like to introduce Barbara Wiesen, the curator and director of the Gallberg Gallery and the chair of the Permanent Art Collection Committee, to receive the gift.
Thank you, Richard. I would just like to say, on behalf of the Permanent Art Collection Committee, I am grateful and honored to accept this memorial sculpture by Richard into the Permanent Art Collection. This memorial sculpture, who's by one of the most important sculptors in Chicago, is a significant contribution to the college's art collection. The Art Committee's goal is to bring significant and educational artworks to the community so that no matter where you are on campus, you can have a meaningful experience with art. Richard, thank you so much for this very elegant memorial. Thank you.
And finally, I'd like to introduce to you our president, Dr. Robert Bruder.
Good afternoon, everyone. Richard, my compliments on a magnificent creation, one that we will honor and cherish for many years to come, and a tremendous expression of an event that is tragic, as we all know, but brings to mind some of the beauty also that will emanate from that through your creation here. So we thank you for that. Chuck, thanks for your excellent comments. And Carolyn, thanks for bringing us the relevance of what happened 42 years ago. Certainly Chuck is right. No one can tell it better than a person who was there. And certainly we appreciate your view and your understanding, as well as the total experience that can only be experienced by someone who was there. So thank you so much. Looking around, I don't know that everybody was born back in 1970. We have some young people here. I know I was, and I can remember exactly where I was when this unfortunate incident took place. I was at the time a counselor and director of college housing for Sullivan County Community College in South Fallsburg, New York. The campus wasn't a particularly big campus. In fact, we were really all in temporary buildings, and we were on a bit of a hill. And I remember the event as if it was yesterday. And that evening, when I went onto the campus in what was our Student Life Center, which was really a Butler building, students had gathered, and they formed a circle inside the building, and they just lit just seemingly hundreds of candles, and they just sat quietly for hours in a circle, and they had fashioned out of sheets and other material the likeness of the four young people who perished unfortunately that day. And they would sit there the entire night and reflect on that incident, and those of us who were there would visit periodically with them and speak about the tragedy, hoping that it would never happen again, and of course it did sometime later at Jackson State. And unfortunately, it shook the foundations of higher education in this country, and we would have hopefully learned something from that, and that we would avoid tragedy like that going forward. But we know that isn't the case, that while maybe something quite like that hasn't happened again, we've seen other instances of tragedy in colleges and university campuses in this country, like what took place at Virginia Tech and over at Penn State, and not so far from here, NIU. So hopefully there'll be a day when we don't have to live through those kinds of experiences, and where we can all literally learn to live as one and together, and to enjoy the bounty that higher education provides. Not only do we celebrate this particular sculpture today, but hopefully you'll have a moment before the day's out or sometime in the next couple of days to walk over to Homeland Security Education Center, where we have replaced those 4 silver leaf maples with 4 magnificent specimens of beech trees. If you're a botanist, as I am, the beech tree represents strength, represents stateliness, it represents almost the best of what plant material is all about, compared also very often with the oak tree. So there are 4 magnificent trees there with a plaque that's been fabricated through Hurricane Graphics, and Carla is here today, and she spent countless hours helping to create a memorial there to complement the magnificent piece that you've created for us here, Richard. So hopefully you'll not only have a chance to experience this, but take a moment to walk over there and see the 4 replacement trees that will be here for at least 40 more years, if not beyond, and also the plaque that celebrates the life of these young people that was tragically taken from us. So we thank you all for coming today, again helping us celebrate a very special occasion, to be able to acknowledge what has taken place, learn from it, grow from it, and be better people as we continue to live our own lives. I can see where we have some food and some drink over here, so I invite you to participate, and again invite you to walk over to Homeland Security and take a look at the second half of today's celebration. Thank you all for coming.